I was sitting at my desk in my small but cozy office, surrounded by a stack of printouts and the colorful post-it notes I used to mark tasks for the team, when my phone vibrated. It was sitting next to my laptop, and the screen lit up with a soft glow, flashing a name that always made me feel three things at once: warmth, alertness, and a little irritation. Mom. I instinctively reached for the phone, but at the last moment my hand froze. I almost pressed the button to let the call go to voicemail. After all, I was at work, at Sportmax, a company that manufactures and wholesales sports equipment. As a regional sales manager, I was used to Thursdays being mini Mondays, one continuous whirlwind of calls, meetings, and attempts to meet quarterly plans. But there was something about the call, something vague, a little alarming, something barely perceptible, that made me pick up the phone anyway. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "What's wrong?" "Rita, honey, I'm so glad I caught you." Her voice was more cheerful than usual, almost solemn. "Are you free this Saturday night? Your father and I would love it if you came over for dinner, around 6. And before I could ask her what the occasion was, or why she sounded like she was about to burst into tears, or, on the contrary, into song, she hung up. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my hand, staring at the dark screen, as if it could give me an answer. Something in her tone struck me as odd. She was clearly upset about something, but she didn't go into detail. The first thing I thought of was that it might have something to do with our trip to Italy. In 2 weeks, our entire family was supposed to fly off on a long-awaited vacation, 10 days in Tuscany, walking around Florence, wine, pasta, museums. I had been dreaming about this for almost my entire adult life. In fact, this whole trip was my initiative. For the last 3 years, I had been working non-stop, 60-hour weeks, clients who seemed to have golden expectations and aluminum budgets, endless reports. Business trips. I was burned out, exhausted, spent myself to the last drop, and finally, I had saved up enough time and money to do what I had dreamed of since I first saw Roman Holiday with Audrey Hepburn, and I wanted my family nearby. My parents, David and Susan, are now retired. My dad worked in construction all his life until 5 years ago, when his back finally gave out and he could barely climb the stairs even in his own house. My mom worked as a secretary in a law firm for almost 20 years until she was suddenly laid off and the office doors closed behind her forever. After that, life became more difficult. The pension was barely enough to cover the bare necessities. And, of course, any trips abroad were out of the question, so I decided to pay for everything myself: flights, hotels, food, excursions. It cost me almost $10,000, $9,200 to be exact, but for me, there was no better investment. To see how my mother's eyes sparkled when she climbed a hill in Siena for the first time in her life, or how my dad, sitting in an outdoor cafe, would enjoy strong Italian coffee, all this was more valuable than any bonuses and premiums. My younger brother Jake was supposed to go with us. He's 26. And still, as his mother says, finding himself. He works part-time at a grocery store. I often pass his section when I stop by for bread after work, and lives in a tiny, dreary apartment downtown, with peeling walls and neighbors who clearly don't know how to keep the TV at an acceptable volume. For the past 2 years, I've been helping him with rent and paying the insurance on his aging Toyota. Jake is a kind, thoughtful boy who's just lost his bearings. Maybe the trip will help him find his bearings. He has a girlfriend, Emma. They've been dating for about 8 months. I've seen her a couple of times, at a barbecue on the 4th of July, then at my mother's birthday party. She seemed charming, although sometimes she seemed a little clingy. She works at a nail salon and talks a lot about the things she wants: designer bags, trips to Los Angeles, dinners at restaurants I've never even heard of. But Jake seems crazy about her. He constantly shows me pictures of her on his phone, as excited as if they were Oscar's photos, and tells me he's finally found the one. I can only nod and hope he's right. Saturday night came quickly. I arrived at my parents' house around 5:30, parked the car at the curb, and walked up the familiar drive to the house where I had spent my childhood. Mum opened the door almost immediately, her face lit up with a wide, almost theatrical smile, but her eyes betrayed anxiety. Something was wrong. Dad was sitting in his usual chair, wearing his usual checked shirt and a newspaper in his lap, but he, too, looked a little tense. Jake was already there, with Emma. Of course, they both looked as if they had just heard some joke that only the two of them knew, and they kept exchanging glances. as if they were holding me backstage at a performance I was not privy to. We sat at the table, on which Mom had set her best china, the same one she only took out at Christmas and Easter. The food was delicious, as always, but the air was tense, and then, when we had finished the main course and were moving on to the wine, Mom suddenly cleared her throat. "Rita, dear," she said, folding her hands in front of her, "your father and I wanted to talk to you about something important today." My mouth immediately went dry, my heart sank. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Is someone sick?" No, nothing like that," Dad answered quickly, but there was an awkwardness in his voice. "It's about the trip." I sighed with relief, allowing myself a slight smile. "Thank God," I said. I was beginning to think that someone had cancer or something terrible. "What about the trip?" Dad fidgeted in his chair, glanced quickly at Emma and Jake, then back at me. "The thing is," he began, "Emma is coming with us." I looked around the table in confusion, trying to catch some hint that this was a joke, a silly, inappropriate one, but not real, not what had actually happened to me that Saturday night at my parents' house. I swallowed, then smiled a little tightly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Okay," I said, "it's great that you feel that way about her. If she comes with us, great. She can just book a seat on the same flight and find a hotel room nearby." I tried to sound calm, logical, like someone looking for a solution, not panicking, but in response I heard my mother's quiet sigh and her even voice, which, despite her attempt to remain gentle, was already showing tension. "That's exactly what we thought," she said, avoiding my eyes. "We checked, but unfortunately there wasn't a single free seat left on your flight, and the entire hotel is already fully booked for those dates." My eyebrows slowly crept up, and a familiar mixture of irritation and incomprehension began to boil in my chest. "Okay," I said a little more harshly, "then maybe she'll just fly out the next day? Find another hotel nearby. Seriously, the world won't end if she spends one night alone." But then Jake's face, already trembling with tension, flushed scarlet. "I don't want Emma to live anywhere else," he said sharply, as if it were a matter of life and death. "I want her to live with me, in the same room." The whole time, I looked at him, feeling the ground beneath my feet tremble slightly, not from fear, but from how quickly cracks appeared in once strong connections between people. "So what exactly do you want from me?" I asked finally, feeling myself increasingly losing the threads of this strange conversation in which, it turned out, I was not the main character. As if she had been preparing for this moment, my mother took a deep breath, and her face took on an expression of tense determination. "We were thinking," she said, trying to sound careful, "that perhaps Emma could take your place on the trip. She'll use your ticket, and your hotel room." It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I sat up straight, gripped the edge of the table to steady myself from the shock, and whispered, "What do you mean? Take my place?" Mom didn't answer right away. An awkward pause hung in the air like pollen before a storm, and then she said, still not looking up at me, "We've discussed this. Your father and I will take the rooms that were reserved for you and Jake and Emma will stay in the room that was originally intended for us." I sat there, paralyzed. Everyone around me seemed so calm, so confident, as if this decision was a logical extension of family comfort and not a knife stuck in my back. "Wait," I finally managed to say, "are you trying to kick me out of a trip I planned and paid for?" The air seemed thicker at my words. Everyone frowned at the same time, as if I had said something unacceptable, although I was only trying to call a spade out loud. Jake looked at me with a coldness I hadn't seen in his eyes, not even when he was arguing with my dad as a teenager. "You make good money, Rita," he said without a trace of embarrassment. "You should be ashamed of yourself for always emphasizing how much you help us. It's not nice." I almost choked. "Jake," I said with difficulty, "I paid $9,200 for this trip, in full, for all of us." There was a pause, so thick that the air in the room seemed to thicken to the consistency of butter, and then Mom finally broke the silence. "If you really want to go to Italy, you can do what we suggested, buy a ticket on a different flight, book a room in a different hotel." She sounded hurt, as if I was the one cutting them out of my life, and not the other way around. And then, unexpectedly, everyone at the table started laughing. Dad was chuckling quietly. Mom was giggling like someone who had finally gotten rid of an unpleasant task. Jake was grinning at Emma, and She covered her mouth with her hand, but she couldn't hide her triumphant smile. They actually thought it was funny, not a betrayal, not a humiliation, but some kind of sweet family scene. I slowly forced a smile out of myself, a pathetic, routine one, and nodded. I understand, I said, and fell silent. For the next hour, I sat at the table like a ghost, listening to them animatedly discuss the itinerary, the wine tastings, the photogenic streets of Italian villages. It was as if I no longer existed. They went on talking about plans, laughing, arguing about something petty, as if I had not been there at all, as if I had just been the one who signed the checks and could now leave without disturbing the fun. And then, at some point, when no one was looking, I stood up, slowly, almost imperceptibly, and without saying a word, I picked up my jacket from the back of a chair. I walked through the living room, past the pictures on the wall where we still seemed like a family, and opened the front door. The cool air hit my face, like a reminder that I was still here, still alive. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys and my purse, and my heart pounded so loudly that it seemed like the whole block could hear it. I got into the car, started the engine, but didn't drive right away. I just sat there, looking ahead, staring at the steering wheel, as if it could give me answers. About 10 minutes later, I finally drove home. When I got to my apartment complex, I sat in the car for a while, then slowly got out, walked down the path as if through a viscous fog, went up to the second floor, and, opening the door, went inside. I closed the door behind me, put my purse down on the floor, and suddenly felt something inside me break. The tears came suddenly, like a dam breaking. I cried like I hadn't cried since my grandmother died, loudly, bitterly, until my stomach clenched. I didn't try to take off my clothes, didn't change, didn't even take off my shoes. I just collapsed on the couch and cried until there wasn't a drop left, and then I fell asleep, still in the clothes I'd been wearing to dinner, exhausted beyond belief. When I woke up on Sunday morning, my face was puffy, my eyelids were taut as if I'd had a bad allergy, and my back ached from sleeping curled up in an awkward position, and for a moment, just one tiny second, I forgot what had happened. Then everything seemed to return to normal, the usual morning rituals, the sounds of the coffee maker, the feeling of a rough blanket on my shoulders, and yet something inside me was different. Something was broken, like glass had cracked, and now every ray of light refracted in it distortedly, painfully. I felt nausea rolling over me, not physical, but the kind caused by the bitterness of resentment, stuck somewhere between my throat and my heart. I was sitting on the couch, still in the same clothes, trying to come to my senses, when my phone vibrated again on the coffee table. I shuddered, my gaze automatically darting to the screen, the name familiar, almost native, but now causing me a whole storm of conflicting feelings. Mom. For a second, I wanted to ignore the call, hang up, turn off the sound, never answer at all, let them live in silence for a while, but part of me, stupid, naive, or perhaps still hoping, thought that maybe she was calling to apologize, to say that she'd rethought everything, that she'd realized how hurtful and unfair their actions had been. I picked up the phone, trying to sound calm, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't spent the previous night in tears. Hi, I said, Rita, it's good that you're awake, came my mother's cheerful voice, and I knew right away, no, she hadn't rethought anything. There was no remorse in her tone, no note of regret. On the contrary, she sounded like someone enjoying life and unburdened by conscience. Jake and Emma are having an engagement party when we get back, she continued cheerfully, and we were hoping you could pay for it. I almost dropped the phone. What? I blurted out before I could stop myself. They're having it at Giovanni's, you know, that fancy Italian place downtown. It's Emma's dream come true. We thought it would be a sweet gesture. Well, you're the big sister. I sat there speechless. Sweet gesture echoed through my head. After they'd basically kicked me out of my vacation, I should do something nice for them? Of course I'll pay, I heard myself say, quiet and even, like I was saying something I'd planned for a long time. Oh, great. Mom said happily, I knew you wouldn't let me down. Emma will be thrilled, and by the way, can you give her your number? She wants to discuss what she's planning with you. That's so thoughtful of you, darling. I'll text her now. And before I could say anything, she hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone screen, and for the first time since yesterday, a smile appeared on my lips, not a happy one, not a relieved one, but the kind that comes when you finally realize the full depth of what's happening, when something inside you clears up and becomes crystal clear. At that moment, a plan was born in me, clear, calm, and so logical that it didn't even seem like revenge. It was a reminder to show them all what it was like to truly experience disappointment. The first thing I did was dial the number of the hotel in Italy, the very one where I had so ardently booked rooms, compared reviews, checked the distance to the sites. They connected me with the receptionist. I confirmed the reservation, gave my name, and, taking a deep breath, said, "I want to cancel." The cancellation fee was about $300, but at that moment I didn't care at all. The only thing that warmed me was the knowledge that when they got to Rome, they would have nowhere to stay. I hung up, feeling something like relief in my chest, as if a heavy stone had finally come off and rolled away. Step 1, accomplished. The next day, as my mother promised, Emma called. "Hi, Rita." Her voice was clear and enthusiastic. "Your mother gave me your number. I'm so excited about the party. I have so many ideas." I smiled, pushing aside the feeling of cynicism, and answered, "Me too. Do you want to meet and discuss what you have in mind?" "Yes, of course," she said happily. "How about that coffee shop on 5th Street that always has the best pastries?" "Great, I'll see you there." I arrived a little early, grabbed a table by the window, ordered a latte with almond milk, and watched the coffee shop crowd together, exchanging news, clutching bags, throwing kisses. Emma showed up right on time, carrying a designer handbag I recognized from a glossy ad that cost more than Jake made in a month. She walked up to me with a confident gait, hugged me with the enthusiasm one uses to hug a friend they haven't seen since college, and whispered, "I'm so glad you're doing this for us." Then, as she sat down, she added, almost as an aside, "I know you pay for most of Jake's stuff, so I figured you'd help with that, too." Her words cut deeper than I expected. There was no gratitude in them, only expectation, as if it was my duty to pay for someone else's wishes. I took a sip of coffee and nodded, trying to speak softly. "So, tell me, what kind of party do you imagine?" Emma perked up, her eyes lit up. She even leaned slightly towards me across the table. "I want it to be really special, something that will be remembered for the rest of their lives. I think there will be 50 people. Well, maybe 60, live music, of course, not just a DJ, food, something exquisite, so that everyone will say it was the best thing they have ever tasted." I nodded, smiled, mentally wrote down every detail. "And real flowers everywhere, not those plastic ones, a professional photographer, so that there are pictures worthy of the cover. And also," she looked at me with delight, "a chocolate fountain. I've always dreamed of that." I kept listening, kept nodding, as she beamed and pulled out her phone and started showing me photos from Pinterest, banquet halls, bouquets, 3-tiered cakes. "Look at this chart," Emma said, holding her phone up to face me. "I found it on Pinterest. Isn't it gorgeous?" I leaned in closer, taking in the meticulous floral arrangements, the sparkling garlands, the elaborate dishes laid out in a schedule as if this were not just a party but a royal-level wedding. "The flowers alone," she continued, staring at the screen in awe, "were probably $2,000, but they're worth it, they're definitely worth it." I nodded, keeping a friendly smile on my face even as I began to mentally calculate like a seasoned accountant. "And the band I want to hire," she added, gesturing excitedly, "charges $1,500 for the evening, but trust me, they're amazing. I heard them at my cousin's wedding. It was magical." I nodded, mentally jotting down every number, every item. The party, I realized, was going to cost at least $8,000, and probably more, given everything she'd just started talking about. "You know," Emma continued dreamily, biting her lip, "what would be really special? If we could have champagne for the toast, but not just any champagne, but the real good stuff. Do you have Cliquot, or whatever it's called?" She obviously meant Cliquot, but I didn't correct her. "That's a great idea," I replied softly. "What else do you want?" Emma thought for a second, then spoke with renewed enthusiasm. "Well, obviously I need a new dress, something that says I'm a bride-to-be, but isn't too wedding-y, you know? I saw the perfect one at Nordstrom. It was like $400. I just figured since you were paying for everything else, I'd understand if it was too much." I smiled, looking into her eyes with the same expression I had when I bought Jake his first bike. "No, no, it's okay. I want you to have the perfect dress." Emma flushed with delight, grabbed my hand, and whispered, "You're the best sister-in-law ever." We spent almost another hour in that coffee shop, discussing every aspect of the party, From the place card designs to the type of desserts she wanted, something with macarons, but definitely individual portions. By the time we finally said goodbye, I estimated that the total cost would be close to 10 grand. This is going to be the best engagement party of my life, Emma exclaimed as she walked out, clutching her designer handbag. I can't wait to Instagram it. All my friends are going to love it. You totally should, I replied, encouraging her. Let them see, let them envy, let them wait for a miracle that will not happen. That same evening, I was already lying on the couch when my phone vibrated again, a message from Emma, a link to her post. I opened her page, and immediately an image appeared in front of me with a gold background, vignettes, and a caption, OMG, guys. Jake's amazing sister is throwing us an incredible engagement party, live music, Giovanni's restaurant, exquisite food, champagne, everything like a fairy tale. Honestly, I can't believe how lucky I am to marry into such a generous family. This party is going to be legendary. I can't wait for you all to see it. Dozens of likes, enthusiastic comments, and heart emojis were already gathering under the post. I took a screenshot and saved it to my phone, and then I really couldn't help myself. I laughed, not from joy, not from kindness, but from such a profound, almost theatrical absurdity of what was happening that laughter became the only possible outlet for my emotions. I laughed until tears appeared, until my stomach began to ache with tension. 2 weeks left, 2 weeks until their flight, 2 weeks for them to enjoy their fabulous trip, 2 weeks for Emma to shine on social media, dreaming of her glamorous holiday. It was fun, in its own way. The next 2 weeks flew by. I barely heard from my family. Jake sent one short message. Thanks again for the party, Emma loved it. My mother called one evening, her voice slightly worried. Rita, are you okay? You've been so distant lately. I told her that I was just overwhelmed with work, the quarter, reports, clients, all of which usually rings true. Emma, meanwhile, sent me more and more inspiring pictures from Instagram, ideas for decoration, photos of previous parties, each one even more expensive, even more sophisticated than the last. Her enthusiasm knew no bounds, and she clearly had no idea that her perfect fairy tale was built on a shaky foundation. 3 days before their flight, I made another important call, this time to the airline. I gave them all the names, dates, booking codes, and said in a calm voice, I need to cancel all return tickets. Yes, I understand there will be a fine. Yes, I confirm the cancellation. Yes, I agree to the charge on the card. When I hung up, my chest was buzzing. I could feel the adrenaline pulsing in my temples. Their flight to Rome, no hotels, no return tickets, had become a reality. Now, if they wanted to go home, they would have to find a way out themselves, buy new tickets, pay for a hotel, finally learn to understand that nothing in this life comes for free, especially when you've forgotten who you owed everything to. That night, the night before their flight, I barely slept a wink, lying on my back, staring into the darkness that seemed to breathe in my face. I thought about everything at once and nothing in particular, only somewhere deep inside, like a dull hum, a persistent thought sounded that caused a feeling in me similar to guilt. They were my family, my mother with her kind but sometimes naive eyes, my father, whose hands always smelled of wood and joint ointment, and Jake, with whom we built tents from sheets in the living room as children. They raised me, helped pay for my education, were there for all family celebrations and even in those rare moments when I was unbearable in my independence. These were my people, my blood, and yet, remembering them laughing at me at that table, my mother looking away, my father allowing Jake to speak to me with icy condescension, I felt that guilt recede, replaced by a cold, sober sense of justice. They had chosen Emma, they had written me out, they had decided that I was just a resource, and now I was going to let them feel what it was like to be cut from the plan. Their flight was scheduled for 6 in the morning, which meant they had to leave for the airport around 4. I volunteered to drive them, partly because it was the right thing to do, partly because I wanted to see them off in person, to see the joyful anticipation in their eyes that would, in a few hours, give way to confusion, irritation, and maybe even outright panic. The alarm went off at 3:30, and despite a sleepless night, I got up, dressed quickly, pulled my hair up into a bun, grabbed my keys, and left. At my parents' house, they were already standing outside, huddled under a street lamp, each with luggage that was bigger than they were. Emma's suitcase was as if she were packing not for a 10-day vacation, but at least for a round-the-world trip. She was beaming with excitement. Rita, you're an angel, my mother said, hugging me. I can't believe you got up so early just for us, I smiled and answered. Opening the trunk, anything for the family. On the way to the airport, they chatted animatedly, discussing which sights they must see, where to buy the most delicious ice cream, which route to take to get to both the Colosseum and the Sistine Chapel. Emma talked nonstop about the photos she was going to take for Instagram. She had already chosen filters, captions, even music for her stories. Jake, with his arm around her shoulders, dreamed of romantic dinners on open-air terraces. Overlooking the Tiber, I sat behind the wheel, politely nodding along and listening as they made their perfect plans that didn't involve me. It was almost like a performance, a well-rehearsed play in which I played the role of the driver. As we pulled up to the departure terminal, the sky was just beginning to light, but inside it was already bustling with life. People in travel clothes, families with children, couples with identical backpacks, all heading to the check-in counters, excited to begin their adventure. I helped unload the luggage, adjusted the handle of Dad's suitcase so it wouldn't jam, picked up Emma's huge trunk and struggled to place it on the trolley. "Are you sure you don't want to come inside with us?" Mom asked. "We could have coffee while we wait." I shook my head. "No, I have to go. I have an early meeting," I lied. In reality, I was planning to go home, lie in bed, sleep for a couple of hours, and then just walk around the city, drink coffee, read, do whatever my heart desired. Mom hugged me tightly. "You are such a reliable daughter, Rita. We are so lucky to have you. We can always count on you. You take care of everything." I nodded, pressing my lips together, trying not to give myself away with my eyes or my body language. Her words echoed in my head, like a joke, because in a few hours, when they landed in Rome and realized they had no hotel room, they would really know how much they had been counting on me. "Have a wonderful trip," I said, and hugged each of them, one by one, calmly, confidently. Emma was the last one. "Thank you again for the party," she whispered. "I promise it will be amazing. You are the best future daughter-in-law in the world." I watched them enter the terminal, Jake putting his arm around Emma, and Mom and Dad holding hands like teenagers. Their faces were beaming with happiness, their steps light, like those who do not yet know that clouds are gathering on the horizon. In about 12 hours, everything would change. I returned home, went back to bed, but sleep still did not come. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, imagining how events would unfold. They would arrive in Rome around midday local time, tired, with heavy suitcases, but in anticipation, thinking only about how to quickly get to the hotel, take a shower, change clothes, and immediately into the streets of the Eternal City. But when they approached the reception desk and said their names, the girl at the reception would look at the screen, politely apologize and say that there were no such reservations, that perhaps there had been a mistake. They would start arguing, first politely, then insistently, then indignantly. They would demand a manager, show printouts, send out pleas and threats, and then panic would begin. There would be no available rooms in Rome at the peak of the tourist season, not in the center, not on the outskirts. Only some dubious apartments with terrible reviews and exorbitant prices. Then they would finally try to call me. I imagined the phone ringing, the word "Mom" appearing on the screen again, flickering and freezing in the air. But I would get up, go to the nightstand and, without thinking, put the phone away, and then I would go for a run. I urgently needed to clear my head, to throw out the energy that I had been holding back for too long. The morning air was pleasantly cool on my face as I ran along the winding paths of our quiet residential area, where the houses seemed to still be asleep. The windows were dark, and only the occasional passerby with dogs met me along the way, nodding politely but without words. For the first time in weeks, my body felt free, that lightness that no amount of money could buy or someone else's approval could give. It seemed as if with every step I was throwing off the weight of accumulated complaints, expectations, omissions, and becoming myself, without the need to justify or explain. Returning home, I took a hot shower, which replaced the tension in my muscles with pleasant relaxation, put on my favorite summer dress and went to a coffee shop on the other side of town, the one where it is always quiet, cozy, and serves a healthy breakfast, which I have long wanted to try. I chose a table on the terrace, under an umbrella, where the sun gently warmed my skin, and, sipping coffee, looked at passers-by, cars, colorful shop windows. At that moment, it seemed to me that for the first time in a long time I was really looking at the city. The trees seemed greener, the sky brighter and more endless. Even the traffic jams and street noise did not sound irritating, but like part of a large living mechanism, to which I no longer feel resentment. The afternoon was spent at my friend Sarah's, who lived just a 20-minute drive away. We'd known each other since college, when we'd shared a dorm and together saved each other from tests, bad dates, and emotional storms. I didn't go into the details of the family drama, just said that the trip to Italy had fallen through. "Oh, that's terrible," Sarah said as we settled into her cozy porch. Basking in the setting sun and sipping homemade lemonade, she took my hand, squeezed it in the way only she knew how, and added with a slight smile, "But hey, do you want to do something fun instead? Jason and I were planning a hike in the mountains this weekend. Come along." I laughed, surprised and touched by the offer. "Really? You don't mind if I'm a third wheel?" "Are you kidding? This would be amazing. Picture this, the woods, the fresh air, we'd turn off our phones, disconnect, just live like we're 20 for a few days." The idea wasn't just tempting, it was perfect. "I'm in," I said. "That's awesome. We leave Friday morning and come back Monday, bring something light and some good hiking boots." We spent the rest of the evening chatting about anything that wasn't family squabbles, money, or a sense of duty. We discussed work, the TV shows we'd swapped, her relationship with Jason, which she said was surprisingly stable, like someone had reset my life to normal. It was one of those rare conversations that leaves you feeling uplifted rather than tired. I drove home around 8 p.m. and when I opened the front door, my phone was still in the drawer, where I'd tucked it away that morning. Not wanting reality to intrude on my carefully orchestrated day, I pulled it out, turned it on, and it immediately sprang to life, fluttering with an avalanche of notifications, missed calls, voicemails, texts, all from my family. I swiped through the screen, and the messages began to pop up, one after another. From Jake, "Rita, call me back ASAP, there's something wrong with the hotel." From Mom, "Rita, please call us, there seems to have been a mix-up." From Dad, "The hotel says our reservation has been cancelled, we need help." And finally from Emma, "Oh my God, Rita, the hotel says we have no rooms. What's going on?" I counted 17 missed calls in all. The voicemails were undoubtedly filled with hysteria, pleading, and probably accusations. As I was rereading the messages, the phone rang again. Mom was on the screen. I waited a few seconds, then hit the answer button. "Hi, Rita. Thank God, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you all day." Mom's voice sounded confused and tense, as if her calm, homely world had collapsed in an instant. "I wasn't home," I answered evenly. "What happened?" "The hotel cancelled our reservation. They say there's no record. We have nowhere to stay." My voice was shaking. I sighed. "Actually, Mom, I should probably tell you. I cancelled everything, the hotel, and the return tickets, everything." There was silence on the line, and then I heard Jake screaming in the background, "This is terrible. This is a disaster." Emma was sobbing, complaining about a ruined vacation and a ruined life, and then Jake's voice cut through the airwaves as if he were standing right next to her. "Rita, you cruel, vindictive little, how could I do this to you?" I chuckled. "It's simple, Jake, I just cancelled, just like you cancelled me, from a trip I planned and paid for and was looking forward to." More silence, then Mom again. "Rita, we're your family, we don't have money for new hotels or flights, you have to help us." I sighed, softly, almost affectionately, but with a note of stone in my voice. "You know, Mom, I really don't know, you made it clear that I'm just an ATM to you. Well, the ATM is officially closed." I hung up with an icy calm that surprised even me, as if the storm that had been boiling inside me for the past few days had finally subsided, leaving behind a smooth, glassy surface, and into this surface I threw the last thing without hesitation. I blocked them all: phone numbers, instant messengers, social networks, everything I could think of, every possible thread by which they could be drawn back into my life without permission. I carefully cut off, like a hairdresser who has finally decided to give them a short haircut. The silence that followed, ringing, dense, like white noise in headphones, suddenly seemed to me the most peaceful sound in the world. I sat on the edge of the sofa, holding the switched-off screen in my hands, and felt how clarity slowly but surely came, as if I had finally left the stuffy hall where everyone was shouting and demanding, and found myself in a spacious room full of light and silence. 3 days later, my phone rang again, not from the same number, no, but the name on the screen immediately evoked warmth and respect. Aunt Helen, she was my father's sister, and since childhood, she had seemed to me the only adult in the family who could not only listen but also hear. She never offered advice, but when she did, her words were listened to. Rita, dear, her voice was soft, almost affectionate. What the hell is going on? Your parents called me from Europe, in tears, asking me to bring you to reason. They said you were stuck with them in Italy and wouldn't let them come back. I laughed, although there was more weariness in my laughter than joy. Aunt Helen, do you want to hear the truth? Of course, I'm not your mother. I told her everything, slowly, in detail, from the dinner when I was essentially kicked out of my own trip, to Emma's engagement party, with its live music and designer dress and hundreds of dollars a bottle of champagne. Helen listened silently, without interrupting, without saying, well, you know, or they didn't mean any harm, and when I finished, she sighed heavily and said, well, I admit it was a bit harsh, but I can't say they didn't deserve it. Your parents and Jake have taken advantage of your kindness for years and never felt the slightest bit awkward about it. Do you think you did the right thing? I paused for a moment. I think I stood up for myself for the first time in a long time. Well, that's good, it was about time. You're not their wallet, let them get used to it. The next day, my doorbell rang. I walked up to them and, looking through the peephole, froze for a second. All four of them were standing on the threshold: Mom, Dad, Jake and Emma, tired, exhausted, irritated. Their faces were red from the long journey. Their clothes were rumpled, their suitcases stood at their feet. Like silent witnesses of an anxious journey, I knew that this conversation would happen someday, and deep down I was ready. I opened the door. We need to talk, Mom said, not even waiting for an invitation, pushing past me into the apartment. The others followed her, and from the first seconds I understood that there would be no calm dialogue. Their faces were distorted with anger, their eyes were flashing lightning, and their whole being screamed about the desire to find someone to blame. You ruined everything, Mom began, raising her voice even before I managed to close the door behind them. We had to pay for hotels with credit cards. We borrowed money from Helen to buy return tickets. It was a nightmare, not a vacation. 5 days of arguing with hotels, airlines, translators, stress, and insomnia. Dad added, and his voice trembled as if he was holding back tears. Not from pain, but from anger. Jake stepped forward, pointing his finger at me. And after this, you seriously think you'll be invited to my engagement party? Forget it, you don't belong there. I chuckled, and, frankly, I couldn't hold back my laughter. It burst out on its own, surprised, dry. Jake, honey, did you seriously think I was going to pay for your engagement party? Emma went as pale as a porcelain doll with a new crack painted on her face. What do you mean? She whispered. You promised. I shrugged, almost indifferently. I lied, just like you all lied to me when you said that going to Italy was a family vacation. Emma covered her mouth with her hand, as if she wanted to stop the screaming. But I already told everyone on Instagram. I invited 50 people. I wrote about a live band, about exquisite cuisine. It looks like you have problems, I answered, not looking away. Mom looked up at me, and despair appeared in them. Rita, you can't be serious, can you? We are a family, you have to help us. I straightened up and felt my shoulders finally stop hunching under the weight of expectations. I don't really owe you anything. I don't give you money anymore. I'm not your emergency parachute anymore. I'm not the ATM you can cash out whenever you want. They were all silent, looking at me with expressions as if I had just spoken a language they had never heard, probably because for the first time in my life, I refused to be convenient. You know what? I said, walking up to the door and throwing it wide open, letting in daylight and street noise. I guess our conversation is over. They stood rooted to the spot, as if they didn't believe that I was actually seriously going to kick them out, as if this was all just a scene that would be followed by the usual reconciliation, hugs, forgiveness, as it always was. But I didn't budge, didn't soften, didn't back down, and when it became clear they weren't going to leave on their own, I began to push them toward the door, not roughly, not with anger, but with the firm determination of a woman who had let others step over her boundaries for too long. My mother babbled something about how everything can be discussed, that you can't abandon your own people like that. But I didn't listen. As if in slow motion, I pushed them all, step by step, first Emma, then Jake, then Dad. and finally Mom, out into the common hallway, onto the cold floor, under the dim light of the lamp. Don't write to me again, I said before slamming the door. Until you're ready to apologize. I turned the bolt and, leaning against the door, stood in silence, listening to the tense ensemble of voices humming behind it, snatches of swearing, reproaches, arguments, and all this lasted for a couple of minutes, until finally the footsteps died away and their voices dissolved in the noise of the entrance. The next morning, sipping coffee and looking out the window at the bright sky, I saw a new letter in my email, from Jake. The subject was laconic and cold, communication. Inside was something that, frankly, I was already prepared for. Rita, after what you did to us in Italy and your behavior yesterday, my parents and I have decided to temporarily stop all communication with you. Do not call us, do not write, do not show up at our house. When you are ready to apologize and fix everything, perhaps we will think about talking to you again. Jake. I reread the letter twice, just to make sure I hadn't missed a single drop of hypocrisy, and then, without thinking, I hit delete, instead of the guilt I'd felt so often in similar situations before. Instead of the heavy lump in my chest, I felt light, real, physical, as if the heavy bag I'd carried on my back for years had suddenly disappeared. I was free. That weekend, as we'd agreed, Sarah, her boyfriend Mark and I went hiking, a real one, with backpacks, tents, a campfire and nights under the stars, where instead of phones there was the crackling of wood, instead of Instagram there were the reflections of the moon in the river, and instead of reproaches there was the laughter of friends and quiet conversations under a blanket. We climbed mountains, drank water from streams, ate sandwiches on the peaks and were silent not out of awkwardness, but out of peace. For the first time in months, I felt not just at peace, but I felt like I was living my own life, not someone else's, in which I was relegated to the role of sponsor, savior, comfortable, silent background. When I returned to work the following week, I threw myself into things with such energy, as if all my internal resources had finally stopped leaking into someone else's bottomless funnel. Not only did I cope with my responsibilities, I initiated new ideas, completed 2 complex projects, and even helped colleagues who were stuck in a rut. On Wednesday, after a morning meeting, my boss, a smart and attentive woman, invited me into her office. Rita, she said, folding her hands on the table, I must say, I am impressed with your work lately. You show initiative, responsibility, your efficiency is simply off the charts. What do you think of a promotion? Senior Regional Manager. It will be accompanied by a raise, about 30% of the current salary. I could not hold back the smile that I want to remember. I would be very happy, I answered. Great, we will formalize everything next week. A few months passed, spring turned to summer. I moved into a new apartment with a view of the park, and finally bought myself the car I'd always wanted, not the flashiest, but just the right one for me, quiet, reliable, with a good sound system. I went on 2 vacations, one with Sarah, one with coworkers, where for the first time in a long time I just relaxed, without regard for the needs of others. And then one evening Aunt Helen called again. Rita, dear, she said, thought you might be interested. Jake and Emma finally got engaged last weekend. I paused, putting down my teacup. Oh, yeah? How did it go? It was modest, at your parents' house. Your mother made the sandwiches herself and bought the cake from the grocery store. No bands, no flowers. Emma looked like she was on the verge of tears the whole time. I felt a small, subtle sense of satisfaction, but I didn't say anything out loud. Besides, Helen added, your parents told everyone that you couldn't come because of inappropriate behavior. Most of the guests looked, to put it mildly, awkward. 6 months have passed since then. I'm in a great new job, earning more than ever before, and, most importantly, spending my money on things that really bring me joy, experiences, trips, books, parties with friends, beautiful dishes that I choose not because someone needs them, but because I like them. I finally feel like I'm living for myself, and not for a role I was once squeezed into. I know that my family probably thinks I'm a terrible person. They probably tell others how I betrayed them, how I changed or chased money, but I also know that if I hadn't stood up and said enough, nothing would have changed. They would have kept taking and taking until there was nothing left of me. I don't expect them to apologize anymore. I don't have time for that. I have a life where I am respected not for my generosity, but for my strength, not for my wallet, but for my character, and I finally realized, that's enough.